The moment she looked at me, I knew something cruel was about to be said. Not at the baby. Not at her son. Right at me. Then she said it. This baby can't be our blood. The entire room went silent. You could hear the soft beep of the 4-pump, the distant cry of another newborn down the hall, and the shifting of Caleb's shoes on the hospital floor. My arms tightened around my daughter, Bella, as if shielding her from the words. Caleb blinked, confused, like he had just stepped into someone else's nightmare. I saw the way his face twisted, trying to process what he'd just heard. But me, I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just smiled. Not the kind that says, I'm okay. It was the kind that says, I see you. And I'm not letting you drag me into your mess. Because what Veronica didn't know, what no one else in that room knew, was that I had already taken steps. I had known this would come, and I wasn't afraid of it. Go ahead, I told her calmly.
Do the test.
Whatever gives you peace. She didn't respond right away. Caleb opened his mouth, but couldn't find any words. The air between us thickened, filled with everything that had gone unspoken for years. I still remember how it all began between Caleb and me. It was at a freshman event at Northwestern University. He was sitting alone on the grass, scribbling notes in a sketchbook. I had just spilled coffee on my sleeve and muttered something sarcastic about first impressions. He looked up, smiled like he knew something I didn't, and said, That's one way to make a mark. We weren't immediate. We were gradual. Caleb, with his calm logic and soft wit. I, with my messy energy and stubbornness. Somehow, we balanced each other. We built a quiet little world of our own. But from the very start, his mother hated that world. Veronica always had this way of making me feel like I didn't belong. Like I was a guest passing through her family's picture-perfect storybook. She never said it outright, but her eyes always did. The same eyes now staring at me in this sterile hospital room, holding on to suspicion like it was oxygen. Caleb proposed 2 years after graduation. We got married in a small garden ceremony just outside Chicago. She wore black. Things only got worse after we started trying for a baby. I had 2 miscarriages in the first year. The third one nearly broke me. The doctors said it was endometriosis and that getting pregnant again would be difficult, maybe even impossible. I spent so many nights curled up in the bathroom, crying in silence so Caleb wouldn't hear. I started to believe that maybe Veronica was right, that maybe I wasn't good enough, not for her son, not for this family, not even for motherhood. She never offered sympathy. Just silence. The kind that burns more than words ever could. Then one morning I woke up and something felt different. I took the test and stared at those 2 lines, not daring to breathe. Caleb cried when I told him. I didn't. I was too scared to let the hope Indiana. Every week was a fight. My body ached. The nausea was relentless. There were close calls, emergency appointments, and days I didn't think we'd make it. But Bella held on. I held on. And finally, after hours of labor and more fear than I knew I could carry, she arrived.
Perfect.
Tiny.
Alive.
Veronica didn't come to the hospital until the next morning. She didn't ask how I was. She barely looked at Bella. And then she said what she said. Like my scars meant nothing. Like my pain had been invisible all along. But I wasn't the same woman who had tried to win her approval. I wasn't going to beg. Veronica could have her test. She'd find out soon enough that blood doesn't lie. But neither does strength. Caleb didn't say a word. After Veronica's accusation, I turned to look at him, searching his face for something, anything. Anger. Shock. Denial. But all I found was silence. He stared at the floor, jaw clenched, hands useless at his sides. The man who once promised to protect me from anything didn't say a single thing to his mother. I felt something shift inside me. Not break exactly, but change. A curtain falling. A door closing. She didn't stop there. I want a paternity test, Veronica said, her voice sharp and steady like she had rehearsed it. I turned my body slightly, still holding Bella against my chest. Her breathing was soft.
Calm. Trusting.
Fine, I said. My voice didn't tremble. But be careful what you're looking for. You might not like what you find. I saw something flicker in her eyes, just for a second. Then it was gone. Caleb finally looked at me, and I saw it, hesitation.
Doubt.
He didn't fight for me.
Not really.
He was still trying to figure out how to keep peace between his wife and his mother. But some wars don't deserve peace. They deserve the truth. That night, after the nurses left and the hallway lights dimmed, I sat with Bella in the crook of my arm. Her little fingers curled around mine. I looked down at her and whispered, "No matter what anyone says, you are mine. You are everything." I didn't wait for Caleb to make arrangements. I made the call myself the next morning. Found a reputable genetics lab in Evanston, booked the appointment, and texted Caleb the details. He replied with a simple, "Okay." No apology. No questions. I didn't care what Veronica thought. But I needed Caleb to see it. To see us. When we arrived at the lab 3 days later, the receptionist greeted us with polite professionalism, unaware of the tension swirling between us. Caleb signed his paperwork first. I went next. Then we handed Bella over gently for a cheek swab. She was calm, blinking at the nurse like she trusted the world completely. I envied that. Veronica didn't participate in the test. She made it clear that she didn't need proof. She already knew what she believed. But she sat there in the waiting area, her purse clutched tightly in her lap, like a judge waiting to declare a verdict. On the ride back, Caleb was quiet. He drove with one hand on the wheel and one resting on his thigh. I watched the side of his face. There were no words between us. No touch. Just the soft sounds of Bella cooing from her car seat. Later that evening, while Caleb watched a rerun on TV, I stood in the nursery. Bella was asleep, her little arms raised above her head like she was reaching for something in her dreams. I ran my fingers along the edge of her blanket and whispered, "You are not a question. You are the answer." I knew DNA could tell one kind of truth, but only a mother knows the rest. Even as I waited for the results, I realized something else. I wasn't afraid of the outcome. I was afraid of what came after. What Caleb would do. What would it mean if the test didn't bring him back to me, if nothing did? The call came on a Tuesday morning. I had just finished feeding Bella and was settling into the couch with her asleep on my chest when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said to pick it up. "This is Dr. Lyman from the genetics lab," the voice said. "We've completed the testing, but we'd like to go over the results in person. There's a secondary finding we believe you should hear directly." My stomach clenched. "Is my daughter okay?" "Oh, the test confirmed paternity. It's nothing about her health. But we do recommend you both come in." Caleb sat stiffly on the other end of the couch. I told him what they said. He just nodded, eyes unreadable. When we arrived the next morning, Veronica was already there, dressed in one of her expensive beige coats, her hair pinned back in a sharp bun. She looked confident.
Smug even.
I recognized the expression. She thought today would be her moment. That she'd finally prove what she'd believed all along. The counselor, a kind woman named Dr. Lyman, led us into a quiet office. She opened a folder, glanced at the paperwork, then looked up at us with a neutral expression. "The paternity test results confirm that Isabella Monroe is the biological daughter of Caleb Monroe and Elira Monroe." I didn't look at Veronica, but I felt the tension in the room shift. Caleb let out a breath, slow and shallow. For a moment, there was only the quiet sound of paper being turned. But Dr. Lyman continued, "There is something else. A secondary result that came up as we verified parental matches." Now, I turned. Veronica's arms were crossed tightly, her jaw rigid. She looked ready to deflect whatever it was. "We always run double confirmation to ensure no sample errors," the doctor explained. In doing so, we found that while Caleb's DNA matches the child's paternally, there is no maternal match between Caleb and Veronica Monroe. It took a second to land. Then another. Veronica blinked. "Excuse me?" Dr. Lyman slid the paper toward her. "Based on this data, Caleb is not your biological son." "That's impossible," she snapped, standing from her chair. "I gave birth to him. I nursed him. I raised him. This is absurd." The results were triple verified, Dr. Lyman said calmly. I understand this is difficult to hear, but there is no DNA match between you and Kayla Monroe. She stared at the page, lips trembling.
No.
No, that can't be. This must be someone else's test. You've made a mistake. But the mistake wasn't on the page. It was sitting in the room with us, wrapped in decades of denial. Caleb didn't move.
He didn't speak.
He just stared at his mother like he was looking at a stranger. His breathing had changed, shallow and unsteady, like someone had knocked the wind from his chest. I kept Bella close, gently rocking her while my heart pounded for entirely different reasons now. Veronica started pacing, waving the paper in the air. This doesn't change anything. I raised you. I gave you everything. Motherhood is not about DNA. And that's when Caleb finally spoke. Then why, he said quietly. Couldn't you believe that about Bella? Silence. It hit her harder than the papers ever could. His words weren't cruel, just honest, and more cutting because of it. I looked at him, then really looked, and saw something crumble. Not his strength, but the lie he had been built on. Something had always been missing between him and Veronica, and now the shadow made sense. She stood there, frozen in place. You're still my son, she whispered. I believe that, Caleb said. But that's what makes it worse. You couldn't believe it for her. And with that, he turned to me. Bella stirred in my arms, oblivious to the storm her tiny presence had helped expose. As we walked out of that lab, I didn't look back. Bella was cradled against my chest, her tiny heartbeat steady and warm against mine. Caleb walked beside me, quiet, heavy with thoughts. Behind us, Veronica sat alone in that stark white room, holding a truth she had never expected and couldn't change. For once, the silence was hers to carry. Outside, the wind was crisp. I breathed it in deeply, like I was finally exhaling after years of holding my breath. The storm she brought into that hospital room had passed. And here we still were, unshaken, intact. At home, Caleb was different, quieter, distant in a way I hadn't seen before. He spent hours sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at the wall, rubbing the side of his thumb like he was trying to smooth out something deep inside himself. One night, I sat beside him. We didn't speak at first. Bella was asleep in her crib. The monitor hummed softly on the nightstand. Finally, I broke the silence. You're still you, I said. He looked at me, eyes tired and wet. But I don't know who that is anymore. I reached for his hand. You're Bella's father. My husband. That's who you are. The rest doesn't have to define anything. He nodded slowly, but the pain didn't leave. It wouldn't for a while. Days passed. Veronica didn't call. No message. No apology. Just an eerie silence where a relationship used to live. Caleb didn't bring her up, and I didn't press. There was too much else to focus on. I pour myself into Bella, into morning feedings and lullabies and the quiet joy of holding her close while she slept. But late at night, when the house was still and my thoughts got loud, I realized something deeper. It wasn't just Veronica's silence that haunted me. It was my own. The part of me that had spent years trying to win over someone who never wanted me to begin with. So I started therapy. In the first session, I cried more than I spoke. But by the third, I started unraveling the truth. I hadn't just been hurt by Veronica. I had tied my worth to her approval. I kept hoping that if I tried hard enough, loved deeply enough, she'd see me. But I finally saw myself. And I was done waiting for her to see me. It changed something in me. I stopped checking my phone for a message that would never come. I stopped explaining myself in my own head. I let go of the story I had written, where I needed her blessing to feel like I belonged in this family. I already belonged. Bella and I were enough.
Caleb noticed the change.
Slowly, we started to reconnect. It wasn't sudden. It was in the little things. He started cooking again, nothing fancy, but his pancakes always made Bella giggle. We took evening walks with the stroller, not talking much, but walking side by side. One night, after Bella had fallen asleep early, Caleb turned to me on the couch. I'm sorry I didn't defend you, he said. I knew what she was doing. I froze. I looked at him for a long moment. I know, but you're here now. That's what matters. He nodded, eyes soft. I want to be better. We both do, I whispered, leaning into him. We stayed there like that, breathing together, the weight between us lighter than it had been in years. Whatever happened before didn't own us anymore. We were building something new, just the three of us. And for the first time, it felt solid. It felt real. It felt ours. The day my father arrived, the house filled with a kind of calm I hadn't felt in months. He knocked gently, but I could already see his silhouette through the front window. I opened the door, holding Bella in one arm, and he smiled with tearful eyes before saying a word. I finally get to meet my granddaughter, he said, stepping in with that quiet steadiness I'd missed since childhood. Dad, Ronald, was never the loud type. He didn't need to be. His presence had always been enough to anchor a room. And now, holding Bella in his arms for the first time, I saw something light up in him. He swayed slightly, whispered something only she could hear, and smiled when she grabbed his finger. You've done good, Allie, he said gently. You've done well. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear those words until they settled into me. All the fear, all the doubt I'd been carrying suddenly had less weight. For years, I'd been trying to prove myself to someone who never saw me. And here was my dad, seeing everything without me having to say a word. That evening, while Caleb made tea, I opened a package that had arrived earlier in the week from my sister, June. She couldn't travel just yet, but she'd sent something personal, something only she could have created. It was a scrapbook, handmade with soft pages and hand-cut paper shapes. On the first page, in her familiar handwriting, was the title, Family Isn't Blood, It's Proof. Each page held affirmations, photos from our childhood, a few quotes, and space for me to add moments with Bella. I flipped through it slowly, taking it in like a deep breath. I hung it above the crib that night. It belonged there, right above the place where my daughter dreamed. A few days later, an email came. Subject line, an apology, I guess. It was from Veronica. The message was stiff. A few lines about not knowing how to handle the situation, a vague sentence about emotions getting the better of her, and something about hoping Bella would grow up well. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't sincere either. It wasn't for Bella. And it certainly wasn't for me. I read it once, then closed the tab. No anger. No impulse to write back. Just a quiet certainty that I didn't owe her a response. Not anymore. Instead, I spent that evening sitting by the window, Bella asleep on my chest, listening to the soft hum of Caleb's voice as he read aloud from a book in the next room. I thought about everything we'd been through. The storm, the silence, the reveal, the healing. Sometimes cracks let in the light. And that light had changed everything. I no longer felt the need to shrink myself to fit into anyone's image of a perfect daughter-in-law, a perfect mother, a perfect anything. I was enough, just as I was. Caleb came into the room later, and for a while, we just sat there watching Bella sleep. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and smiled softly. She has your eyes, he whispered, and your stubborn chin. I laughed quietly. Poor thing. No, he said, turning to me, his voice steadier than it had been in weeks. She's lucky. She has your strength. He hesitated before speaking again. I still feel like I'm trying to figure out who I am. But I know this is real. I leaned into him, resting my head on his shoulder. It is, I said. It's not perfect, but it's ours. And that's all I ever needed. Peace didn't come from fixing everything. It came from knowing what was worth holding on to, from choosing each other again and again. And we had chosen. Every day, in small and certain ways. This was our family. Not perfect, but real. And finally mine.